Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. We're continuing our reading of Martin Heidegger's Metaphysics. He was a German philosopher, very brilliant, wordy, but nonetheless valuable, okay? We're on the restriction of being, and we're picking up on page 196, paragraph numbered 134. Yet here it may and must be asked, which interpretation is the true one? The one that simply takes over the perspective of its understanding because it has fallen into it, and because it offers itself as current and self-evident? Or the interpretation that puts the customary perspective into question from the bottom up, because it could be and in fact is the case that this perspective does nothing to indicate that which is to be seen? Nothing to indicate that which is seen, alright. Certainly, giving up the ordinary and going back into questioning interpretation is a leap. Only one who takes the right running start can leap. Everything is decided by this run, for it means that we ourselves actually ask the question again, and that we, in these questions, first create the perspectives. That's an interesting thing to compare interpretation to running. So you have to build up the momentum. However, this does not happen in wavering arbitrariness, or in relying on a system that has been set forth as the norm. Instead, it happens in and from historical necessity, from the urgency of historical Dasein. Wow, so historical necessity and the urgency of the historical Dasein. Legen and Noen, gathering and apprehending, are an urgent need and an act of violence against the overwhelming, but at the same time, always and only for it. So, violence is always overwhelming. This is true. It overwhelms for it. So, Legen and Noen, gathering and apprehending, and that whole process has an element of violence that is always for it. For the uncovering. Thus the violence doers must time and again shrink back from this use of violence, and yet they cannot back down in this will to conquer that at the same time shrinks back. At moments the possibility must flare up that the conquest of the overwhelming can be fully and most certainly fought out if the concealment of being. So the conquest of the overwhelming is going to fight out the concealment of being. The emerging sway, which in itself essentially unfolds, so the emerging sway and unfolds as logos, as the gatheredness of the conflicting. When they gathered, it's going to be a tad bit violent because you're uncovering it, right? The forced separation from the just seeming to the appearing, remember? It's simply preserved, and thus in a certain way every possibility of appearing is withheld. This audacity, which is in truth the highest recognition, belongs to the violence doing of the uncanniness. So the audacity, of course, is to the uncanniness, right? Because oftentimes when someone does something uncanny, we do say like, wow, this person has the audacity to do that. To overwhelm the appearing sway by withholding all openness towards it. Withholding all openness towards it, and to measure up to it by keeping the sight of appearing closed to its almighty sway. Now that one is a little bit trickier to follow. To overwhelm the appearing sway by holding openness toward it. You're going to hold sway by holding openness in a certain direction. But for Dasein, withholding such openness toward being means nothing other than giving up its own essence. So Dasein has to give up its own essence towards being if it's being withheld to be open. This demands that it either step out of being or else never step into Dasein. Oh, that's an interesting comparison. So you can step into Dasein, or you can step out of being. This expressed once again in Sophocles in a choral ode of the tragedy Oedipus at Colonus, lines 12:24 through 25, Never to have stepped into Dasein triumphs over the gatheredness of being as a whole. So if you've never gone into Dasein, that is going to help you overcome the gatheredness of beings as a whole. Never to take over being here, Mephanei, is said of the human as the one who is essentially gathered together. So the human is the one who is gathered together. They got it together. That's interesting because we often say, get it together. So this gatheredness that he's speaking out, how it's innately connected to being and humanness, is quite interesting when you think of language, since he focuses so much on language. With Phusis as it is gatherer. So Phusis is the gatherer, remember? Here, Phusis, Phanei, is used to refer to human being, but Logos is used in Heraclitus' sense as the fittingness that holds sway over beings as a whole. This word of the poet expresses the most intimate connection of Dasein to being, and its opening up, for the poet's word names what is farthest from being, not being here. Well, the poets are good at that. The intimate connection of Dasein to being. So poets have helped to express that. How so? I mean, I don't think I would consider Heraclitus a poet. Here the uncanniness possibility of Dasein shows itself. To break the excessive violence of being through Dasein, ultimate act of violence against itself. Well, that is strange, Dasein in doing an act against itself. Excessive violence of being. Being can be excessively violent towards Dasein, and through Dasein hurt itself. Dasein does not have this possibility as an empty way out, but it is this possibility insofar as it is for a Dasein. It must indeed shatter against being in every act of violence. So Dasein shatters against being. This looks like pessimism, but it would be preposterous to label Greek Dasein with this term, not because the Greeks were somehow optimists at bottom after all, but because these assessments miss Greek Dasein altogether. The Greeks were, to be sure, most pessimistic than a pessimistic can ever be. I don't know, Schopenhauer seems kind of more pessimistic to me. I mean, Hobbes, reducing everything down to the state of nature, I don't know. That seems way more pessimistic in the human potentiality. I mean, the Greeks, well, actually, he has a point. If you think about how they have the whole genre of tragedy. I mean, yeah. Hercules was a tragedy. I mean, very pessimistic. You can work so hard and then go insane because your stepmom is haunting you. Hera, remember, was Zeus. They were also more optimistic than any optimist. Plato's with the good, maybe? Their historical Dasein had not yet entered the realm of pessimism and optimism. Both assessments in the same way. Well, wait a minute, Zeno, wasn't he Greek, and he was deeply pessimistic at times, yet he was hardcore minimalist, so maybe one could argue the distinction of pessimism and minimalism together. Both assessments in the same way consider Dasein in advance as a business, either a bad business or one that is going well. So no matter which way we look at it, he's contending Dasein can be seen as a business, so something that's happening, an exchange. This way of viewing the world is expressed in Schopenhauer's well-known proposition, life is a business that does not cover its costs. Okay, so yes, Schopenhauer. Life is a business that does not cover its cost. Minimum wage workers be like, we hear that? The proposition is untrue not because life does cover its costs in the end, but because life as being here is not a business at all. Ooh, well, that's interesting. I mean, you go on about your business daily, so I don't know. Transactions have to happen in order for us to survive, whether we're trading, bartering, or purchasing, or taking credit out. There's an exchange, and the busy bees going about their business doing their thing. I mean, I don't know. We say, mind your own business, right? We have a lot of natural words we say to denote life as business, right? It has been one for centuries now. But because life as being here is not business at all, true, it has been one for centuries now. And this is why Greek Dasein remains so alien to us. Maybe he can contend the Dasein is, but we're very familiar with their tragedy and their mode of thought. What do you think, fam?